No, I did that with that.
Yeah, I just can't stay here. That's right.
You just tell me?
Just be cool with it. Yeah.
Yep.
I can't hear
3
you.
minutes on public input.
Instead of.
Oh,
I think we're live.
are we
Yeah.
ready?
Yep.
Okay. We'll open the commission meeting with this pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance. Where's- Most Reverend Mark Chambers will do the invocation.
Good evening to everybody on this nice, cool day. I hope, we thank you for having the air conditioning just right in here tonight. Let us have a word of prayer. Holy Father, we give you thanks for this hot day. It is hot, but we thank you that we have a place that we can be cool and that yet we can still get together and conduct business for the good will of our city. We thank you for our commissioners, for what they do, for giving up their time to come and to listen to the citizens and try to make things better for all of us. And for our city manager, our assistant city manager, and all the department heads and all of our employees. We thank you for what they do. They do so much behind the scenes, and we fail to give them recognition and say thank you for what you do for us. Bless our city, bless our citizens, and we ask that this meeting tonight be in peace and harmony, and that all decisions shall be made with your guidance and for the goodwill for all, and not for ourselves, but for everyone. We lift this prayer up to you, Holy Father. Thank you for loving us. Amen.
Thank you, sir. Public input will be limited to 3 minutes this evening because we have a lot to cover. Public input. Seeing none? Okay. Name, address.
Roger Lomshak, 1147 South 220th Street. Just wanted to say a few words about the homeless situation that's been on the everybody's radar recently with the meeting we had last week. Darren Hall said something that I really appreciated at that meeting, that the city government's charter, their job, I don't know however you want to put it, is to take care of the functions of the city, not to be a healthcare center as well, or to administer that kind of stuff. And I think that's something that I would just ask all of you to consider as this comes up. I'm sure this won't be the last time that this is discussed. But the idea that should the city government be the solution for every answer, for every question that is asked of you. In my mind, I don't think that's the case. That there are certainly places where the city government could help in the homeless situation, that may be facilitating stuff, and maybe it's in some cases it may be by rewriting some ordinances to give law enforcement the ability to do what they need to do to keep businesses and citizens safe. That's not the same thing as run everybody off or anything, but I hope that you understand the need to give our law enforcement the tools that they need to actually keep people safe, whether that's illegal camping or somebody squatting. I've heard stories about that recently of realtors going in to show a house and there's a squatter in there that they run into and having trouble dealing with that. Or of people camping in somebody's garage and finding out that they're there. Those things are stuff that we want to make sure that the police have the tools they need to make sure that the citizens' property rights are protected. I know in the 20 years actually the 22 years that I owned a business here on Broadway, I saw the change in what was happening from just one or two homeless people that needed some help. that clearly had some issues, to just a parade of people that were coming into businesses, hanging out in front of businesses, making people uncomfortable. And that's the kind of stuff that I think is critical for the city commission to consider how to protect those people, those business owners, how to protect their businesses, which are what help fund they're the lifeblood of our city. And making sure that they can conduct business. They're not worried about somebody tearing through their dumpster every night. I know I had that problem constantly of coming out to work in the morning and finding my dumpster all over my backyard. And that kind of stuff, or just the constant problems with trespassing and panhandling is an issue that needs to be addressed in a way that protects people's human rights, but also doesn't just turn Pittsburgh into a free-for-all. Gives business owners the right to actually protect their property, as well as the citizens of Pittsburgh. That's all I have. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you, sir. Any other? Seeing none, we'll move to the consent agenda. Anyone wish to remove anything from the consent agenda?
Nope. I move to approve the consent agenda.
Well,
Second?
been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. We'll have a roll call vote.
Brooks?
Yes.
Height?
Yes.
McNay?
Yes.
Sigley?
Yes. Moving on to special presentations, 5-year financial forecast.
All right, Mayor, City Commissioners, I want to recognize that Commissioner Munsell isn't here, but he has seen this presentation before. This is very similar to the one that we presented on Working Day a few months ago. This serves as the basis for our budget every year. So Allison and I are going to try to run through this pretty quick. Allison is, of course, our finance director, and we wouldn't have this document without all the staff and the commissioners' input. So bear with us. We're going to try to move through it pretty quick, but we think it's important that the citizens hear the basis for our projections in the first year, obviously, is the budget that we're going to be considering here in a little bit. So thank you. I'll get us off. I'll get us going with the 5-year financial plan. It is a forecasting tool. The city leaders were obviously critical in setting the goals that establish the objectives that we have within this plan. We assess the implications, we develop the strategies, we analyze our revenues and expenditures, which is probably the most important thing that we do. We obviously review all the programs and services and see how we're doing, if there's anything we can supplement. And the main thing is that we grow the strategic decision-making to achieve our financial stability. Financial stability is our main promise to the citizens, that we're going to collect their money well and spend it in accordance with your wishes. So we take that very seriously. Overall, the fund balances are healthy, which is good news. Exceeding through the minimum reserve targets at 16% or 2 months is what our goal is. We're above that across the board. Sales tax revenues do continue to grow. And as we move into 2023, we're in a strong position. I think we're about as well as we could be, and we're doing better than most communities. Our dedicated sales tax has been critical for a lot of our programs. We don't rely on the property tax as much as we do sales tax. We have a lot of earmarked sales taxes, and a half cent right now generates about $2.5 million. So our public safety sales tax, our road sales tax, are benefits of that growth in revenue. The sales tax rate has not increased, but our revenues continue to grow, which is extremely important. Moving forward together, the city and community in a positive state, that's our main goal. We are not just a city, but really we are working for the 20,000 people that live here and the 40,000 or more that may be here during the day. We want to ensure that that financial stability is not just something that we take for granted. There's a few concepts that we keep when we put this plan together. Number one is incremental increases in revenue. That doesn't always mean, or usually even mean, a fee increase, but it is necessary. The reserves are critical. We never know what's around the corner, so we want to make sure that we have the reserves. We always want to review our policies and procedures, whether they're HR policies or how we engage with the community. We definitely want to monitor and control our expenditures, which we do on a regular basis. Every 2 months, we give you a bi-monthly report, and every quarter we review everything, and then by the end of the year, we review the entire budget for the year and make sure that we don't need to make one final adjustment. We practice long-term planning, which today is an example of, And our goal is always to make data-driven decisions. I'll turn it over to Allison.
In '22, our revenues increased by almost $4.8 million. The pie chart shows revenue by source, with sales tax being our highest source of revenue, and then our revenue from utility operations being our second largest source of revenue. Here, the graph shows the general fund's four main sources of revenue. You can see that we had an increase in sales tax revenue in 2022 and a slight increase in franchise tax. Next, we go to the assessed valuation by year, which is the property tax. The net assessed valuation increased a little over 6% in 2022, and in 2023 and 2024, our assessed valuation is projected to increase with the addition of new commercial developments like FedEx. There was a 0.538 decrease in the general fund mill rate, which you can see here with the mill rates from the last 5 years, and that's the lowest it's been in the last 5 years. Here, this is the approximate cost of a residential and commercial building at $100,000. The pie charts show the approximate cost in the various property tax jurisdictions within Pittsburgh for residential and commercial properties of $100,000. Here's the mill levy for the last 5 years, and then again you can see that this is the lowest the mill has been within the last 5 years, with the mill currently at 50.896. That is a total decrease of 0.74 mils. Here is sales tax, the overall sales tax that's charged in Pittsburgh of 9%. You can see that the state makes up the major portion of that, with the city only making up 1.5%. Here we break down that 1.5% as it's earmarked to different things like public safety sales tax. Public safety sales tax was renewed earlier this year by voters, and will go into effect to be renewed on January 1st of 2024. The statutory limit for sales tax is 2%. We only have a 1.5% sales tax, so we give up about $2.5 million in revenue a year because our sales tax is only at 1.5% versus 2%. Here you can see that our sales tax has increased in 2021 and 2022, and we are projected to continue this increase as Q1 was up 10% over this time last year. Franchise taxes have increased. The electric and gas, we saw a big increase for franchise tax, and cable and telephone kind of remain consistent. We see this trend consisting into 2023 as electric rates were increased. Casino gaming revenue remained consistent for the last 3 years, and we expect it to remain consistent at about $370,000 annually. Here you can see our billed water consumption in gallons. Utility rates were increased about 3% in 2022 after 3 years without an increase. And then for utility, we had a 13% increase in usage and consumption in 2022.
Okay, great job. Expenditures. The simplest way to look at our expenditures is really through these pie charts. If you look at it for most organizations, personal services is basically the highest percent. Usually we're around 41 to 42%. Right now we're at 44%, but a lot of that's because of the pay study that we implemented a couple of years ago. The rest of it breaks out as you would expect: contractual services, capital outlay, commodities. Those are the tools and the resources that our employees use to provide the services. And then of course there's debt service, which we usually take about anywhere between 8 mils and 10 mils of the overall mill rate that we have and apply it to our debt. And then as we finish projects, we try to just put the next available debt onto the next prioritized project. It's worked out pretty well in the time that I've been here. With that schedule, there's a chance that we'll probably be coming to you next year with maybe a $2 or $2.5 million debt issuance request. I really like this chart. This kind of simplifies it for everybody that's watching at home. This is where our budget is spent by basically department. And as you would hope, I hope Public Works and Utilities, clean water, streets, sewer, that's all in that biggest block of 36%. As you move across, public safety is right behind that, as it should be. Housing and community development, which obviously there's been a big push in the last few years to get more and more houses, and I think we all understand that we're still far short of our desired goal for housing needs in Pittsburgh. But after that, you've got administration Internal services, economic development is 5%, and then parks and recreation is 8%, which is, you'll see in the budget for this year, there's more programs for parks and recreation. That's usually something that a lot of communities forget to fund because money gets tight and they put it into the areas where they have to, like public safety. But for us, the way the community's growing with all the young families, with the school children, and then our seniors as well, we want to make sure that there's nice green spaces for people to go enjoy themselves. So we do have 14 parks, and it's a priority for us to keep the equipment and the personnel in there so we can enjoy them. The health plan is 5%, and then the public library is 2%. The city health insurance plan is worth mentioning. I think we started, how many years ago? It looks like 7. Our reserve was down to $168,000. That basically means if somebody had a $500,000 procedure, it was gonna really put us in a bind because we're self-funded. So we keep that money and we pay for those, all of our health claims. So with some hard work from our finance director and a lot of the HR staff, we moved to a different model. That model's proved to be extremely positive in the fact that we haven't had to increase our employees' contributions. We haven't had to increase the amount that the taxpayers put into the plan, yet we've been able to build up our reserves to 1.5 million. Once again, that sounds like a great number until you have a catastrophic event happen to one of your employees and you have to pay for that yourself. But I think it's been managed very well, and it's a good reflection of how much importance we put on our fiscal management of the city's assets. This next graph is a real quick way to look at it for people that don't like to read and they want to look at pictures. I'm kind of a fan of pictures. If you look at 2013, the red bar is how much we spent annually on our health insurance. The green bar is what we brought in through the revenue, and the blue is the reserves. If you can look to 2015, we kind of turned the table and started, after implementing the new plan, bringing in more revenue than we were spending, thereby building our reserves. And as you move across, you can tell our reserve line is extremely healthy. We continue to have more revenues than expenses, and part of that is on some of the programs that we've put in for our employees to live a healthier life and to have better access to telehealth and other services that traditionally weren't in our plan. That makes it easier for them to talk to somebody about, hey, I may be on multiple medications. What should I be on? I might help myself, because our goal is just to have healthy employees, and it works for the whole model. Debt service. Basically, the city's bond rating has been upgraded a couple of 3 years ago from an A+ to a AA-. A lot of that stems from our cash reserves, but our fiscal management, the use of a 5-year financial forecast, staying within our budget every year is a big deal. Our current goal for the GO bond debt is to keep the debt service fund between that 7.75 and 10, like I mentioned. Right now for 2023, the mill rate is programmed at 7.9, just under 8%. Types of debt, there's a zillion types of debt. The total amount of outstanding debt, including our principal and interest, is forecast to be just under 26 million. And I think this graph kind of puts it in perspective. The GO bonds is 10.7 million of that, or 40%. Those are the bonds that are pledged from the property taxes and the general, the full faith and credit of the city. So those are basically bonds that once they're purchased, we've committed that we'll do whatever we have to with tax policy to make sure those bonds are paid. After that, we've got our special assessment bonds. So those are some of the bonds that we did, for instance, on the casino, where a private entity has actually backed those bonds. Those are special assessment bonds. So those are bonds that we use, and then we assess the property owners in that district for those bonds. Utility GO bonds is another big one. That's really how we do most of our stormwater, wastewater, and sewer funding. A lot of that comes from the state revolving fund, which is the 9% dark blue up in the top left-hand corner. And then the other one's kind of the TIF and the TDD, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. A couple of numbers that I think are important when you look at this, if you want to just have a perspective. The city's property tax supported GO debt as a percentage of the net assessed valuation is 9.4%. The city's property tax supported GO debt per capita, which means for everybody in town, is carrying $705 of debt. And once again, the mill rate is 7.9. This last graph is interesting. The black line at the top is the amount of debt that legally we could put out there if we needed to per state statute. the red shaded area underneath, starting in 2022, is how much debt that we've actually put out there. So obviously, I think this screams that we're being fiscally conservative. We have room if there's an emergency. If the commission gets to a point that there's just some project they think we absolutely need to do, we won't have to worry about using fund balance. We can go out and issue debt. But all of that white space between that black line and that red shaded area, I will remind you, would have to be paid with property tax or some dedicated revenue stream. So that could theoretically be a tax increase, which is why we're so proud that there's such a big gap between the two. Cumulative debt, probably my favorite chart overall. This is basically all of the debt that we have in the community. It's organized on the right. You can see the boxes. There's 6 different kinds. GO bonds are the biggest block at the bottom in the red. But as you can see, starting in 2023, our debt commitment's just over $4 million. As you move across in 2024, it starts to slide. Some of the debt goes away. And by 2033, we don't really have any debt that extends, significant debt that extends out beyond that. Now, we are definitely going to build a wastewater or treatment plant in about 2 years, and we'll take out significant debt for that as well, but that's all accounted for. But this just shows you, once again, the conservative nature of our portfolio of debt. Am I still going?
You're so.
All right, I got the green light, so I'm gonna talk about reserves real quick. Basically, the best way to think about reserves is there's restricted and unrestricted reserves. A restricted reserve is a reserve that's in a fund like the public safety sales tax, where the voters authorized us to collect the tax. That money can only be spent for the purposes that those voters agreed to. Those are restricted reserves. We can't take those reserves and spend them on a park project. They need to be spent on public safety. So as you look at this green chart, the black line, once again, is the minimum level. In 2019, we finally surpassed the minimum reserves. You may be wondering why we're so far above the minimum reserves, and the answer is exactly that. There's probably 6 different, Memorial Auditorium has earmarked reserves. The revolving loan fund, which we use for economic development, has earmarked reserves. So all of that is reflected in this chart. But the general takeaway from here is that we are healthy. We are not just spending every penny we get. We understand that reserves are critical, and we're definitely not spending money outside of a fund that's earmarked for another fund. Public utility, thought we'd make it blue, seemed to make sense. This is basically our water, wastewater, and storm sewer. Once again, the black line is our minimum reserves. And as you recall, for probably the past 3 years, we've increased our rates by 3% a year, preparing for that big payout of the wastewater treatment plant. As you may know from your own financial portfolio, the more money you can put down on something when you pay for it, that's less interest cost that you're gonna have to pay over time. So we kind of started about 3 years ago, building up our reserves, so they're at a level that when we do go out and get the financing, we can put, hopefully, several $1 million down, in addition to the $9 million that we've already raised through the state, with the help of the state and the federal governments, and keep that overall payment that those taxpayers are gonna see for 30 years to a minimum. Summary and recommendation. Am I still going?
Yeah.
All right. So a lot of this is just talks about the revenue neutral rate. This is some language from last year. We've obviously are going into our, I believe, our 3rd year of having the revenue neutral rate, and our 2nd year of actually having the hearing. But, you know, that's just a check that the state put on us to make sure that communities don't raise their property tax to a level that they're uncomfortable with. And so I think we already manage our city resources really well, but that does continue to exist. We've got assumptions that put this document together. The sales tax revenue is gonna look at a 2% growth for the years 2023 through 2027, using the prior year's level. The assessed valuation is projected to increase 10% over the period of 2023 to 2027. Now, that's a 5-year period. That's not 10% a year. But based on what we saw from the county this year, we think that's a pretty conservative amount. Gaming revenue, once again, is doing strong, so they're about $370,000 a year. Utility rates are gonna continue to go up at 3% until we figure out just where we are with the funding for that plant. All of the revenues are projected to basically be flat or minimal growth. That includes parks and users fees, municipal court fees. The retirement costs will continue to rise. Those are figures that are set by the state, so that's Capers and Kansas Police and Fire. Workers' comp insurance will go up at 3%, and contractual commodities expenses across the board are projected to go 5%, because we all hopefully realize that we are still in an inflationary period, and we just, no matter how much the Fed and everybody works on it, we're trying to figure out where we're gonna land before we make any large adjustments to the 5-year. Considerations, we're gonna adjust revenues based on the trends, we're gonna monitor our expenses, I mentioned most of these earlier. So here's our recommendations for the 5-year financial forecast that's in front of you. We are recommending a 3% COLA in the 2024 budget for all full-time employees, and a 2% for 2025 through 2028. We'll have an additional 2% merit increase in 2025 and 2027. We'll have minimal changes to the debt service fund, as I mentioned earlier, trying to keep that right between that 8 and 10 mil level. All right, we're gonna increase our utility rates by 3% for the years 2024 through 2028. At this point, we'll obviously keep our eye on it. And then finally, we're not gonna recommend any change to the mill rate for 2024 through 2028 in this financial plan. That is, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you said it all. So-
And that hasn't changed from our working day.
Excuse me?
That has not changed from our working day discussions in May. None of these recommendations.
No, I think, go ahead.
The recommendations have remained the same since working day. I think the COLA, it was extended out at 3% all the way till 2028, but we changed that for only 3% in 2024, and we'll assess that per year as we go on. And then the additional 2% merit increase, on working day, it was in 24, but that will actually happen in 2025 since we had the pay study that went into effect in the beginning of this year.
Okay, thank you.
No more questions? Great job. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to open a bit of discussion now on something that was brought up earlier by one of our citizens, and that is the homeless situation. Did anyone have any input on this?
From
Specific-
staff?
Yeah,
From
do we wait until non-agenda items and finish the
So
agenda?
that's next.
We have the presentation of the budget.
Oh, I thought that's what you just.
It
did.
sure felt like it, but no.
No.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry to
Okay,
tell you,
okay.
that there's a $75 million submitted budget I'd like to get to you today.
The other 10 billion that you spent this
And
week.
the other, excuse me?
The other 10 billion that I'm losing, plus 5% more.
Yeah, well, we can talk about that. We can talk
So,
about-
yeah, if you'll bear with me, the easiest way to do this is just for me to read the budget message. Honorable Mayor and City Commission, I present the City of Pittsburgh's 2024 submitted budget for your consideration. At $75,461,000, it's an increase of 4.4% over the 2023 adopted budget. The document was prepared with your input, focusing on improving the life of all those who live, work, and play in Pittsburgh. Our top spending priorities remain public safety, utilities and streets, housing and community development, economic development, assistance, and recreation. We're focused on the Commission's goals of maintaining adequate reserves and effectively managing our debt. In order to address feedback received during the Spruce Up Pittsburgh Town Hall meetings and the results of the Imagine Pittsburgh survey, which I believe there were 600 people responded to that, we've added funds for street sign replacement, tree removal, and building demolition. Our country continues to feel the effects of the rising costs of inflation and the tight labor market. Pittsburgh is no different. We are committed to providing services in an efficient manner with well-trained members of our staff. While it remains difficult to fill certain positions, we are fortunate to the committed team that we have and continue to invest in them. The submitted budget provides a 3% increase, as recently mentioned, for cost of living adjustment for the upcoming year, while most of our other expenses are planned to increase 5%. As a result of the strength of our business and industry, our local economy remains strong, which provides the revenue growth needed to maintain a structurally balanced budget and even enhance some services, which we've done this year. The most stable, significant revenue stream in the budget is the property tax. The net assessed valuation is determined by the county, increased by 9.6% over the previous year. Of this increase, 5.8% was due to new construction, which includes the new FedEx facility. We also retired bonds for the TIF district at Town Center, which includes Home Depot and many of the surrounding businesses in that area, thereby ending those property and sales tax exemptions, which was significant. This had a positive impact on our property tax and sales tax revenues. The remaining 3.8% of the net valuation increase is a result of natural growth of the value of existing property in Crawford County. So that's my house, your property, your boat, whatever it was. But that's only 3.8%. That was less than 4% of the total, which is down significantly from last year. With no additional debt committed, the 2024 submitted budget recommends no change, once again, to the mill levy rate for the upcoming year. The other major revenue for the city is the sales tax, which continues to perform well. In 2022, the sales tax collections were up 13% compared to 2021. So far in 2023, sales tax collections continue to grow, but at a much slower rate. As a result, we're looking at a 2% increase for the 2024 year. The city receives the 1% of the gaming revenues. Once again, that's been pretty stable. We're looking at about just under $400,000 a year for that. The 2024 submitted budget includes a 3% increase in water and wastewater fees. This is continuing an effort to build up the plant, as I mentioned. Just to remind people, the current plant's 50 years old, and it is inadequate to meet the increased requirements for nutrient removal specifically, as well as our anticipated growth. Construction of the new plant is scheduled to begin in 2024. I also want to reiterate that we've raised $9 million from the federal and state to help offset that cost, which was estimated to be $50 million right now. So that's pretty nice. Our revenue growth is offset by cost increases from inflation and expanding community. Personnel and commodities represent the bulk of these expenses. The number of city employees in the 2024 submitted budget has increased by one full-time equivalent to 297.9, with the addition of a third position which supports codes enforcement. I want to make that clear again. We have added one position, and it will be for code enforcement. We currently have 2 code enforcement officers.
For the report on strong arm robbery, I want this recorded. This is robbery. You must handle it. Quit pushing me. I'm walking out. My motherfucking money.
Through the generous contributions of many local businesses and individuals, the city will have a new mini golf course in 2024. $180,000 has been raised by the private community for that course. Now, we have the responsibility to match that, and we were fortunate to apply for a grant, which I think will provide the match. We haven't received it yet, so there is $170,000 in the budget to make sure that we make good on those contributions if we don't get that grant. But I'm almost 100% positive that we'll get that grant and start on that this year. We've also, to complement that project, are providing lights at the driving range and make improvements to the clubhouse. And we will also replace the diving boards and the slides at the Pittsburgh Aquatic Center. To wrap this up, in addition to labor and commodities, everything is increasingly expensive. Workers' compensation insurance, property and liability insurance, electricity, natural gas, vehicle fuel are all expected to continue to increase by at least 3%. We will continue to look for ways to manage these costs without cutting services. We're proud to say the 2024 submitted budget contains no increase in the employee contributions, as I mentioned earlier, to the health insurance plan. The city staff continues to work with providers to maintain and enhance those benefits, although the costs do not go up. The 2024 submitted budget reflects our effort to address growth and control our costs. Pittsburgh's economy is strong. We're very fortunate, but as a result, we can continue to invest in our workforce, our infrastructure, and our businesses. The following detailed budget is presented for your consideration, and I believe the calendar has us looking to adopt this in September. So I'm looking for the chief over there. So we've got about 5. We have a few extra weeks, but we have the revenue neutral rate hearing that we need to have and a couple others. So this won't be the first, but I encourage all of you to come meet with staff if you have questions specifically. If anybody is curious at home, this will be online hopefully by tomorrow. And I think we're in a good place in Pittsburgh, and I think this budget is reasonably conservative. So in case things do change in the economy, we're not going to be looking at drastic program cuts. We'll just consider our reserves and continue to manage it. What we don't want to do is get in a situation where we're taking the FedEx money and we're taking the property tax and sales tax that came back to the city after that TIF and put it into programs that aren't sustainable. So if something happens, right now we're kind of doing some one-offs, the building demolition and things that we think we need to do. But the last lesson in this budget is that we have almost over $500,000 of money that's now coming to the taxpayers, not in the form of a tax increase because of the TIF project that was the Home Depot development 23 years ago. At the time, there were so many incentives in that. I'm sure there was squawking about why would we incentivize this? But we've all had the benefit of shopping in that district for the last 20 years. And now the citizens have retired that debt and we get the benefit of the sales tax and property tax, which wouldn't be here if somebody wouldn't have the wherewithal to build that 20 years ago. So incentives do work. We use them for housing. We use them for development. But without them, it's very difficult to grow your community sometimes. And we've been very fortunate. And that's all I have on that, unless you have any questions.
I do have a question, just a clarification. So you said there was a 4.4% increase in the budget from last year, but 3.8 of that is capturing the growth? Did I hear
No,
you
the
right?
4.4 is on the expense side.
Okay.
It's very hard to dive into the revenues and say, this revenue is tied to this expense because it all goes into the general fund. But yes, basically of the property tax valuation increase we saw from the county, just under 4% of that was just the stuff that we own is worth more. The big portion of that was from FedEx, who had never paid property tax before, coming online. And the property tax that was abated by the Home Depot TIF development now comes back on the tax rolls. Does that answer any part of your question?
Yes. And what I also heard you say is that part of that growth that will result in some increased revenue will be dedicated to repairing and upgrading signs, removing trees from the streets and intersections, and continuing to demolish substandard buildings.
Yeah, with the Spruce Up Pittsburgh initiative, the majority of the feedback that we got that we could actually take action on was along the right-of-ways, at intersections, the street light is not actually getting down to the intersections, and more importantly, if you're at an intersection looking left or right, a lot of times there's a big tree there that's a beautiful tree, but it's blocking your sight. So as a driver pulls out, they're kind of at risk. So we thought we could kill 2 or 3 birds with one stone if we went through and did an inventory on some of those larger trees that are not on private property, but on the public right-of-way. And some of them are only this big, and some of them are as wide as you can go. So we'll contract for some of that, see how far that 100,000 gets us in this year. And by doing that, we're gonna open up the corners. Well, obviously, the street signs look ridiculous. We wanna make sure they're improved. So we do have a sign shop. We do think we can do a lot of that ourselves. And we think that the money, we'll probably be able to replace almost all those in town. And then the building demolition, it really never ends. It's not always a house. Sometimes it's a garage. Sometimes it's something else. But, in neighbors, the neighbors want, if they're gonna clean up their property, they want the properties next to them cleaned up. And to the extent that we have abandoned properties, I think we're gonna always need to have that aggressive program where we're going in and removing some of those structures, and then through the land bank, hopefully giving that property to somebody that wants to build a new structure or to the adjacent property owner so they can continue to maintain it.
I would just encourage my fellow commissioners to make sure that we fully understand the budget. I feel like last year, our Director of Finance was a little surprised that there was, and you have every right to vote against the budget for the budget. I don't always think that we have to be a 5-0, but I feel like last year, staff was surprised at those votes. So I would, just encourage you, if you have heartburn, to let the staff know so that, if there's some adjustments that need to be made, that they're made, and their work is respected and their effort is respected.
Yeah, Allison's grasp of this document is amazing in the short time that she's been here. So, feel free to reach out. We'd be happy. And that goes for any of the citizens. I mean, it's a public document and it's our city's document. So please ask questions. Thanks for all your help, Allison and the staff for putting it together.
Thank you. Now, back to what I suggested earlier.
So, I'm sorry, Mayor, but the ordinance, we did approve the budget and that was in it. Are we not talking about the ordinance or is this part of it?
Right, we had an ordinance that we're not going to bring forward this evening because we'd like to entertain more discussion on it and to consider further improvements on it. So Kim, you're on.
Yes, all right. Mayor, Commissioners, good evening. I just wanted to take a moment to read the original ordinance from 1988. An ordinance, the purpose of which is to adopt reasonable rules and regulations relating to the parking, storage, and temporary habitation of recreational equipment and recreational vehicles. By adopting this ordinance, it is the governing body's intent to promote the public health, safety, and welfare of the city's inhabitants. With the existing ordinance, we've had a lot of statements and questions. Is this a new ordinance? Yes, it's a new ordinance number, but it's simply adding some verbiage to better clarify an already existing ordinance. With that, the changes that we were proposing was adding some verbiage under the definition of item of recreational equipment or recreational equipment. Just to clarify, we were adding such smaller items as tents, tarps, and blankets, or any other material being used as a shelter to camp or occupy outside of an approved structure for habitation. Under habitation 46-83, it says at no time shall a permanently or temporarily parked or stored recreational vehicle or any recreational equipment be occupied or used for living, sleeping, or housekeeping purposes within the city limits of Pittsburgh. This would limit the ability to tent camp within the city limits of Pittsburgh. So, any questions or discussion, I would be glad to
And that's-
do my best.
That's really the piece that's given us the most consternation was, we've had this ordinance for a long time. We've enforced it for a long time. There's obviously been a proliferation of tent camping in Pittsburgh, and as the police a couple of months ago approached us and the prosecutor's office and said, traditionally what happens a couple of times a year, you'd have somebody extend their property to maybe a relative or a friend, and they'd be out behind their house, and you'd have electrical extension cords winding out to kind of a makeshift building, whether it was a tarp or a tent or whatever, and that's just, for safety reasons, that just can't happen. That's not appropriate. But trying to fix it by wordsmithing it has become a challenge, and that's really why the language we put together, I kind of have the feeling that we'd have discretion by our police officers or our codes enforcement people that, hey, if they walked up to a house and a kid's camping in his backyard of his house, they'd have the discretion to say, hey, you live here, obviously you live here, mom and dad letting the kid camp here. And Kim joked they probably only gonna stay out there till 11 anyway, and they're gonna get thirsty and go in and get some ice cream and go to bed on the couch. But we don't want to put an ordinance together that prohibits that. The last thing we want to do is put down changes to ordinances that are impossible to enforce, that don't make sense. So we'd like to have a discussion with you tonight if possible, and anybody else about, the intent is to make it safe for people and understand that if you're going to live in Pittsburgh, you need to live in a structure. You can't live in a tent or a tarp over a fence permanently, but we think right now the ordinance, the way it's written with that change, may prohibit people from.
Henry, could we put exceptions in there or a time limit, like a week, like Darren's example of a kid or a parents and the kids having a camp out over the weekend or whatever, just, out looking at the stars or whatever. Could we limit that? Could you put a 2 or 3 day limit without prior authorization or something to that effect? Or does that get too wordy?
I mean, we can
we can tailor this ordinance however, you know, you feel comfortable with it. You know, one of the things that traditionally in the past, you know, sometimes we have bike, not a race, but bike tours that may come through town that tent camp in our parks. And so I think, you know, talking a little bit with Darren and Kim this afternoon, maybe a permit process may be the way to go.
If somebody comes in though at 5 o'clock, they're a bike across, you know, Kansas or whatever, and they come in 5 o'clock, you know, on a Friday night, how would they, I mean, they would have to do it beforehand, or, that goes back, would it be possible to put a time frame on it, like no longer than 2 days?
Certainly, yeah, that would certainly be doable.
Well,
Or maybe it would fall under habitation instead of, I mean, be in the recreational equipment also, but maybe fall under habitation and expand that 4683 one further.
so the intent of the tents, whether it's, you know, 24 hours in my backyard or 24 or 48 hours on a bike tour. And I think, I kind of feel that's the word. I don't know how you.
I'm writing as fast as I can. So,
So am I.
So
it's being
that,
taped for anybody that was
Yeah.
wondering, so, yeah.
so I don't want to put words in Cheryl's
Is
mouth.
that where
but-
you were leaning toward?
Well, you know, as far as the campers and things like that go, it's 14 days consecutively. So why wouldn't a tent fall under the habitation also in some form there?
Yeah, we'd have to massage the definition section a little
Yeah.
bit, but,
So if the
But if-
intent if the intent of the tents is to stay, is to habitat, we're saying that this ordinance would not allow that. If the intent of the tents is for 24 to 48 hours, for the simple examples we've given, then it would be all right. But I don't know that permitting, you know, if I've decided, you know, on a Saturday morning that my kids are gonna camp out in the front yard, I'm not gonna be able to get a permit. So,
Well, and permitting, I brought it up about 7 hours ago and got shot down by staff, so I've already been down that road. They're just like, we really want a city where you have to call and get a permit, and I was like, I don't know, I mean, I don't want half the regulations we have in town, I'm one of those guys, but I mean, I understand it, but permitting may be seen as maybe overkill to some people, and we don't wanna become that community where it's like, I've gotta get a permit for my kid to go out back, but maybe we tied it to, for an extended period of time, you know, you can't stay in a tent, I mean, I don't know many kids that are camping for 3 days in the back, I mean,
Right.
It can have inclusions and exclusions, maybe, like an insurance policy does.
but if
this
we
is all
say 3
helpful.
days and they're on private property, I'm just, you know, like currently, that happens at Wesley House, that's private property. We're saying they can stay there for 3 days.
So that's the limit, is 3 days at
Oh,
Wesley?
I'm just saying that
Oh,
one of the
sorry.
things that's giving people heartburn is our unhoused population seeking shelter via tents at different places. And if we say you can be in a tent for 3 days, you know,
Yeah, I think that's where we struggled, was the intent of this, no pun intended,
Intent.
yeah.
what we were trying to achieve was really the thing I described where somebody's behind the house and they've got the electrical cords out there. Now with the proliferation of some of the tent camping, it's becoming, and I'm always concerned that the city's gonna try to regulate the homelessness activities because we're just an additional responder really. And I don't think we're gonna be able to write it. If we could write an ordinance and address that, we'd probably all be working somewhere else because.
Well, and I would hate to give the impression that we're trying to criminalize.
Yeah.
Yeah. So have we looked at other cities to see if they have magically solved this in their ordinances or?
Yeah,
I haven't seen anybody that have magically
There's
solved it this
There's
time,
no
but
magic. We've got a couple of governors coming to town in 2 days, maybe the magic's here and we need to
Yeah.
figure it out, but I think once again, this is a situation like we've done so many times, we need to find a solution that works for Pittsburgh. We're not gonna be able to take one. Other people are trying, I don't think there's a lot of success, but for us, it's really about what we feel like is the right thing. And the main thing that we have with the tent and the tarps is the safety aspect. Although it may be a last resort, somebody living outside of a residence, out back, with extension cords,
It's not
trying
safe.
to provide for maybe even a young child in the elements, there ain't nothing safe about it, and that's why,
So
we originally were looking at
it
it.
sounds like maybe we don't take action on this tonight, and you guys, put together some different wording maybe?
Well, we haven't done very well yet, but I think these comments help. I mean, we'll definitely, I think 2 weeks would help us at least take another run at it and maybe talk about something as far as timeframes, or does it fall into a different part of another ordinance where it's more appropriate, but I don't think anybody here's gonna have any heartache if we don't. Call, I mean, I'm leaning back so you can see Henry.
Isn't it the big difference we're seeing right now is we're not seeing anybody, kids camping in their backyard type thing. And not to criminalize what Don's talking about, but that's what we're seeing right now.
Well, we have to remember also that we are a cross-country bike trail. And, you know, a lot of people will stop overnight, camp 1 or 2 days, and then move on. And we can't have them being harassed because they
No.
have a tent up someplace.
No.
So we're gonna have to be very specific in what we decide to do here.
And we don't want them to Google it and find some ordinance that says no tent camping, and they're like, well, we're not
Yeah.
going to Pittsburgh. So
Right.
we definitely, Kim's like, I
The
got it.
majority of the people who've came through Pittsburgh before on bikes, Roger, you can maybe help us out here. Where have they camped out? At the parks or,
You want me to come up here?
well, I mean, just you should know about that.
Sorry, yeah, so I've, as I think everybody knows, I own the bicycle shop for 22 years and dealt with the cross-country bikers all of the time. Generally, they camped in Lincoln Park in the old days, and then started using the RV park once that was established as the go-to spot with the shower house there. They have what Stu had brought up is very true, that they ran into trouble even there with getting access to the shower house because they had to register with Parks and Rec or with at Four Oaks when the office is closed. But a lot of times they're not getting in until everything's shut down, and then they can't have access, so they just move on to Girard or somewhere. And they're not exactly a huge economic boon. They helped me out some when I was running the shop, and they did, keep some of our restaurants going too. We had, ballpark somewhere between 500 and 1,000 overnight visitors a year.
Wow.
Through that. So it was not insignificant. It just, wasn't exactly a monster thing, but it was definitely a nice boost for some restaurants and grocery stores, and sold me some inner tubes.
I didn't realize that many people rode through.
So, it's quite a bit. And I think the last few years, because of the situation in the park and the RV park, as well as in some cases the homeless, a lot of those people did decide just to move on. They looked at the situation and said, no, I'm just gonna keep moving. And they just went to Girard or even Walnut if they had enough daylight to camp out, or vice versa, going to Golden City. And so, yeah, I think your point is very valid, that adding in a permit process is probably gonna be untenable, but maybe something that a property owner can permit people who are family members
Right.
to stay, and leave it at that, in a way that say somebody who owns a lot that's empty can't just say, oh, sure, I've given my permission to camp there all they want,
Right.
and we run into a workaround that way that ends up defeating the whole purpose of trying to not have these tent encampments that are gonna end up just with people getting sick, getting hurt, whatever.
And maybe we address the life safety issues too with, electric cords or unapproved.
I think Jay bounced into our office right before the meeting. I was like, Jay usually figures things out pretty quick, and he was like, I think there's something for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
No tent camping for an extended period of time. Now, obviously, that sounds discretionary, but that's kind of the job of the police in the city anyway. I mean, they don't have to write a ticket to everybody that's speeding. Sometimes they just pull you over and say, slow down. But if you can tie it to, those folks you're talking about, they're only gonna be there, a day or two max?
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe there's some legs to coming up with,
And I'm not in that business anymore, obviously, but I'd be, glad to help from that standpoint to try to figure out some wording that's gonna be friendly for visitors, for the bicycle tourist type crowd. So, yeah, happy to help out.
I don't think we need to, I think
You need to table this since we.
I think we need to table this and discuss it. I don't see that we're in a big hurry. So, we don't have to come back with an answer in 2 weeks. It can be 2 months, but we gotta come back with the right answer. And if we do enough discussion, we'll, hopefully, among all of us, we'll come up with something, solid.
well, please keep providing input. We'll shoot for 2 weeks, because if we don't, it'll be 10 months, and you'll be like, what happened to you guys? We're gonna talk about this. But I agree, we're not, the time isn't going by. But we want to get it figured out, we want to get it right. The main thing is we want to give our officers a chance to do their job and feel confident that they're not, handcuffed, another really bad pun, and doing what they're supposed to do, so.
I would move to table, agenda item regarding ordinance number G 1350.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to table ordinance number G 1350. All in favor, do so by saying aye.
Aye.
We have any further non-agenda reports or requests?
Not from staff.
We're going to forego the mayor's moment this evening because we have to go into an executive session for a short while. We're looking at 10 minutes, I believe. We'll need a motion to do that.
I would move that we move into executive session for 10 minutes.
You have to read the
Henry's-
motion.
Yeah,
Oh,
if you would,
sorry.
Yeah, you need to read that.
yeah, please read.
Oh, okay. An executive session is necessary for the preliminary discussion of the acquisition of real property pursuant to KSA 75-4319, parentheses B and parentheses 6, to discuss the potential acquisition of real estate. Now we need the motion.
Motion to recess into executive session for 10 minutes
10 minutes.
Second.
for the preliminary discussion of the acquisition of real property pursuant to KSA 75-4319, subsection B, subsection 6, to discuss the potential acquisition of real estate with the meeting to resume in the commission room in 10 minutes.
Second.
Second, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor by saying aye?
Aye.
question? No votes?
Light.
No votes were taken?
The light, we're not.
We're not?
The light's not on.
I don't
as it's
think we
supposed to be.
usually.
I don't think,
You don't need it, okay.
no votes were taken, no decisions were made. The chair will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Been moved and seconded to adjourn the commission meeting for this day. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.